What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my fantabulicious even co-host, Grant Hughes. Before we get started, please remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you consume it. YouTube, hit that sub button, like, comment, help the algorithm love us back. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, wherever you get your pods. Download every episode. If you've done all those things, please consider telling people about us. Retweet our promos on Twitter. And follow us on all the socials, which are in the YouTube and podcast descriptions. And finally, join our Discord. Don't be like Grant. Join the Discord. Lots of fun conversations happening in there. We are on to our one question for each team in the West Eastern Conference. We already did the West. This is part one. We will split these into two pods because Grant and I always go too long. And that's also just, it makes sense. We're talking about 15 teams. Let's not overload you. First and foremost, though, one, I hope everyone, recording this on Wednesday. We are not putting out part two on Thursday. Hope everyone has a happy, safe Thanksgiving, eats lots of food, doesn't think about the New York Knicks even once while they're eating. But the other important question, Grant, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing really well, and I want everybody to know that I just wrote down at a bullet point, join Discord. So
followed by bullet point, what is Discord?
Well, there's a lot of pre-bullet points of like, what is a computer and how do I use one? But I'm doing well. The Warriors won a road game. I've decided that I'm gonna always explain how well I'm doing relative to how the Warriors are doing. And they did get blown out by like 1,000 points, but that was the B team, which has been really awful against the Pelicans. But they beat the Rockets on the road, so nowhere to go but up after that.
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe Philly is officially the worst road team in the league now, not the Warriors. How about that?
I mean, what remains of Philly, right? Which we'll get to.
We will get to them. So as a refresher, we split this up and we just came up with what our biggest, most pressing or question is for each squad. We tried to be like in depth about this, but also the reason we're asking these questions is because we don't necessarily know the answers. There were people specifically in the YouTube comments who were like, well, why would you make a podcast out of things you don't know? We're curious people. And like, that's the nature of this exercise. Like, I don't have I'm not asking this question I'm about to ask about the Atlanta Hawks if I knew the answer to it. I would tell you the answer. So I thought it was an instructive exercise. Some people disagree. Here's hoping you enjoy it. We begin with the Atlanta Hawks. And my question is, do they understand? Or I guess the real question is, does getting Bojan Bogdanovic back help fix the offense? And assuming it doesn't, does this team understand what its biggest problems are? Because John Collins is back in the trade rumor mill. And his look, when you go and just look at how much he's essentially been, I don't want to say buried within this offense, but how much his front court touches are down. His usage rate was hovering around 16 at one point, down from 22 last season. What were his exact front court touches? I think I have it here. He was at like 30 something last year, and now he's down to 22.3 front court touches this year, 22.6 versus 33.3 per 36 minutes last year. So that's based off minutes. It's not even just his raw playing time. And now he's back in the rumor mill. Their defense has been really good statistically, and watching them and then going into the data, I don't think there's any like noise in there. They haven't gotten, they've probably gotten lucky on opponent 3-point shooting, but like DeJounte Murray has helped out a ton. Clint Capella looks really good. Onyeka Okongwu looks really good. So it doesn't feel like they're getting overly lucky, but to see this team be a top 8 offense and then rank 18th in points scored per possession, they continue to not take enough threes. They're not getting to the rim enough either. And then a part of this, again, is the Bogdanovic absence, having yet to play this season. But Trae Young without DeJounte Murray, the Hawks are a minus 10.2 points per 100 possessions with an offensive rating in the 32nd percentile. DeJounte Murray without Trae, those minutes were like kind of fine. And now they've swung in the completely wrong direction. They're a minus 9.9 per 100 possessions with an offensive rating of 100, which is in the second percentile. And when you look at this personnel, aside from getting Bogdanovic back, I don't know how you go about fixing this internally. And I think you could get creative with certain units, maybe play the Holiday brothers less together when Trae Young's on the court. Does that help you at all? But I don't know that trading John Collins is the pathway to helping your offense here. And that's where I'm struggling to wrap my head around. Like the primary return that's been mentioned was Jay Crowder. I'm assuming as part of a larger package that would have included picks or something, but he's not fixing your offense. And so what does this team need? I think it's pretty easy to identify what they need, but like how far away are they from turning around the offense or at least being able to float? Because look, some of their full strength lineups are really good. Starting lineup, really good. You throw one of the Holiday brothers in there for like DeAndre Hunter, still really good. You throw Yeka in there for Capella, still really good. So some of their top end lineups are really good. And you will eventually have Bogdanovich back. But once you get past like the sixth, let's throw Bogdanovich in there, the seventh guy, there's so many questions with this roster. And I think, you can harp on some of the stuff that Trae Young has gone through. I know I'm rambling here at this point as he tries to adjust to sort of his semi-new existence. Like it's not just a matter of, oh, well, Trae Young's going to continue to get better. They're missing, it feels like, a pretty substantial offensive piece.
Yeah, I mean, you got to it. My knee-jerk reaction to everything that's going on with the Hawks offense is just like Trae Young is in the 9th percentile in effective field goal percentage among point guards.
It's low.
He was in the 84th last year, which was a career high by far. Like generally speaking, his true shooting numbers always look better than effective field goal percentage because you get the free throws in the former. And he's still getting to the line a ton. It's just the ball's just not going in at all from basically anywhere, literally anywhere, as often as it did last year. And it's not as simple. I mean, the simplest explanation, I think, is just saying he's going to shoot the ball better. He's not going to be under 40% from the field. He's not going to be hovering around 30% from three. Some of the floaters will start to fall. He'll finish better at the rim. But that's all presuming that, some of this role change and some of the, new dynamics that Atlanta has had to figure out offensively aren't factors in that. And that means it's not just waiting for a correction or a regression. It's also kind of working through, some fit issues. And like you said, when Murray and Young are on the floor together, the Hawks are great. And that they've got like their most used lineups are really good. It's when you split them up that it doesn't work. So that kind of cuts against the idea that, well, the adjustment is the problem. I guess moving Collins, well, if you're trying to improve the offense, moving this year's version of Collins might do it just because he's become so low usage, that
they've taken away so much of what he does. Like it was the screening with Capella, and now it's just like the ball is in his hands even less, and wasn't in his hands a ton to begin with, but like there's just going to be fewer shots available when you have Murray and Trae in this offense.
Yeah. And I've always liked the theory of Collins as a 5, but having someone on the floor so he's not guarding the 5, so like Okongwu theoretically would make a lot of sense there because he could guard centers and I don't know, switch around and be more of a defensive linchpin, and Collins could exploit the opposing center if you could work those kind of matchups. But yeah, as it is, I mean, I think we probably could talk about whether it makes sense that DeAndre Hunter's role has increased to really the detriment of Collins. I mean, I suppose the theory of Hunter as like his fully optimized self, which is to say a good wing defender who can create a little bit and make open threes, that's a really valuable player type, more so than Collins, who's sort of the tweener 4-5 that's an offense first guy. But like his defense has improved. It's a little strange. I think the combination of Young just shooting it better and Collins, if they don't trade him, kind of finding ways to impact the game or have just put his fingerprints on the game more often, should get the offense back to where it needs to be. It is encouraging that the defense is good or is better. So yeah, I don't, it's tough. I hate just falling into the trade John Collins thing, because that's what happens every year, and it hasn't, still haven't pulled the trigger. But I get it. If there is a contingent that's just like, well, he's not helping us in the way that we're currently formed, and he's overpaid as a 4th option on offense. I get that. I don't know if that's the fix though.
And I don't look. You're not bankrupt necessarily of like picks that you could trade, but you played your most of your best hands in the DeJounte Murray deal. It's like, what is like, who is the target here? Look, this team, frankly, if they were able to finagle it and you were throwing all the young like Collins and Okongwu and trading DeAndre Hunter after he signs the extension would be tough. And there are picks that you can trade. I think so. They can trade their 2029 pick, I believe. So that's like, whatever. But you
What
can
is
trade a
that?
2028 swap, a 2029 pick, and attach everything to throw the boat at Kevin Durant. But I'm trying to think of like a pathway of who else would become available here and would be realistic and then bumps up your offense. There's, you could look at a team we're going to talk about towards the end. Like, I feel like Washington's a candidate to make some pretty bold moves here, but is Kyle Kuzma doing anything for you? Monte Morris doing anything for you? No. So the availability is weird for what they probably need. And so I don't know what direction you go with John Collins. It almost feels like you would be trading him for a role player who doesn't add too much on offense, and then you're getting back like picks and maybe prospects, and you're not at the point as Atlanta where that should be your target in a trade. So I would guess he gets moved. That would just be my guess. But like by the trade deadline, just because he was supposed to get moved this past year, almost got moved to Sacramento. That you thought Sacramento was a blast on offense then. Imagine if it was instead of Barnes, Sabonis, Keegan Murray. What does Collins, Murray, and Sabonis look like defensively? I don't know what the return is that's out there. Maybe a star becomes available or another player that we're not talking about. But even like I kind of thought about, because Bogdanovich is injured, like could you go out and get Eric Gordon and maybe using salary to match that? You're not giving up John Collins in that trade, though. So we've already gone too long on the Hawks, but I'm at a loss for how this thing ends, and I don't think moving him necessarily is the pathway to improving your offense.
No, I agree. I do think, though, that there is a financial component, which is you're going to need to find some money to extend DeJounte Murray eventually, or to sign him.
You extended Hunter, you have Trae Young kicking in, you did extend Capella. So that, yes, for sure. That's a great point.
So it's like if you do have to trade him for a role player, which looks bad just in a talent exchange, from a talent exchange standpoint, you are kind of also considering the realities of we got to find some money somewhere to keep the guy we just traded, a million first rounders for. But yeah, so I got the Celtics next. This is kind of a niche thing, but it really jumped out to me as I was looking at some of their numbers. They're last in forcing opponent turnovers, which kind of goes hand in hand with I guess it's not surprising because of who's not playing, namely Robert Williams, but their defense hasn't been a strength this year. The offense has been phenomenal. They're shooting 1 million threes and making enough of them to really be one of the best offenses in the league. I just wonder, this is the only thing really that qualifies as a weak point right now is that they just don't force any turnovers defensively. And it's kind of an issue that is pervasive across all their high usage, their lineups that have played a lot of possessions. Every team's got, or the teams that have been reasonably healthy have like 3 or 4 lineups that are, eat up the bulk of their possessions. Whenever Horford is at the 5, which is true of their 4 most used lineups, they just don't generate turnover. So it's not like, I don't know if it's just Horford. I think there are a lot of factors at play. Williams being out, being the main one, because everybody else plays differently when he's in the role that the Celtics kind of discovered he should be in late last year or midway last year. And to that point, last year when the two Celtics most used lineups with Williams involved were 66th and 80th percentile in forcing opponent turnovers. So maybe that's your answer. I think it owes to maybe like there's more drop coverage, there's more conservative schemes, there's less gambling because Williams isn't like parachuting in from the corner to block stuff on the weak side. I think maybe, I'll answer my own question a little bit. Does this matter? Like if you're last in the league in something, it piques interest, especially if it's on defense and you're talking about the Celtics because of what they did. Mm-hmm. I think probably the way I view this is they're this good without forcing any turnovers and while playing a defensive scheme that isn't going to look like what they employ in the games that really matter if everybody's healthy. So the frame I put around it is, man, the Celtics, like they've got a couple levels to go up, from where they're at right now. And that was kind of making me reevaluate my thoughts on, and I think we shared this, of how Milwaukee is just kind of, beyond reproach. Once everyone's healthy, there are no questions, no notes about the Bucks. I feel like the Celtics were not a team that I put on that level starting the year, but based on what they've done so far and based on the room they have to improve, I mean, maybe that was a mistake, I guess. So I don't know where that leaves you to respond, but the turnover thing is wild to me just based on how dominant this defense was last year.
Yeah, and I think maybe it just changes, as you already mentioned, when Rob Williams III comes back and how they're able to guard that way and how it changes the dynamic for everyone else who's on the floor. But it's just, I think I'm with you where we underestimated how much of a sure thing this team was, which is wild because they added Malcolm Brogdon, even at like we knew the Gallinari injury in the RW3, but they added Malcolm Brogdon to this group that just made the finals. And whether
Right.
you thought it was like a little fluky or not, and the fact that they are like, you mentioned Milwaukee. Milwaukee must are the only two teams that rank in the top 5 of rim frequency allowed and 3-point frequency allowed. So like their opponents are all taking just a bunch of mid-range jumpers. And I think when you look at the numbers, like it's going to bear out like, oh, they might be getting actually unlucky when you're looking at what opponents are shooting on some of those. Like, yeah, they've probably gotten, they're not really unlucky from 3 or the rim. So like nothing's been super unlucky here. I think they can at full strength be more aggressive than they had been. I'm with you. They're in the territory or the tier of, I don't have notes or concerns. And I think maybe even when you look at the Western Conference, some of the injuries that are being dealt with there, some of the slow starts there too. Milwaukee and Boston, it's not just the East, it's just the entire league. Like those are the two surest things that the NBA has right now.
Yeah. I feel like it's, the two points that gave me pause about Boston. I can't remember now, but I probably took their under, whatever it was, well, they lost the coach that, we have all decided should be credited with their defensive overhaul that turned them into just this juggernaut partway through the year last year. Ime Udoka is not there. So which seems misguided in hindsight, because it's not like, the personnel knows what they're supposed to do defensively, and to attribute something like that to the head coach and not an assistant. Lots of teams have defensive coordinators. Like that may have been a mistake, but I am surprised that Robert Williams' absence hasn't really affected the bottom line. It's changed the way that the Celtics have been good, but it hasn't affected their overall quality. I don't think. Like they still have lineups that are like plus 20 something per 100, which isn't quite on the level of their really very best lineup last year. But yeah, they got a level to go. I think that's my main takeaway is they've got a level to move up, and they're arguably the best team in the league right now.
Look, with the way that, I was about to say, with Drew Holiday on his jumper and then Giannis at the free throw line, not hitting his mid-rangers and not shooting well from 3, you could probably make the case that Boston is the surest thing that the NBA has right now.
Yeah, you really could.
That leaves me with the Brooklyn Nets, and I have zero desire to talk about Kyrie Irving or Jaylen Brown word salad at this point, for that matter. I'm still curious. I know he's been my question is, what is Ben Simmons now on offense? And he has been a lot better over the past 3 games. We've seen him used more as a screener. He is he's scored a little bit more. He's coming off some really strong performances. That being said, he still hasn't finished 10 possessions as the roll man. And then while he's been better over his past 3 games, he's averaging 5 drives per 36 minutes in those 3 games. He's averaging 3.8 drives per 36 minutes on the season. He was at 11.3 drives per 36 minutes in 2020, 2021, his last fully healthy season. And I think this has been a question that's been bandied about already enough, but it's still an issue. And when you go back and you watch Ben Simmons this season, you could talk about how injuries have affected him, how he's been unaggressive, even relative to his standards. There's just something that's still off. And part of it could be if he's playing with another big, and I know they've cut down some of those minutes, he's getting rid of the ball so much earlier, where he's just not passing the free throw line. Go back and watch a lot of his assists in transition. They're like these shuffle passes that he might have thrown before he even crossed half court. And I just don't, what is the best version of Ben Simmons even on offense right now? And does it get, Kyrie Irving's been back for 1 game, but what does it look like when you are at full strength? Are you always going to get the fact that he took 13 shots against Memphis was absolutely fantastic. And that's what you want from him every single game. Is that replicable? And if it is, you're seeing concessions being made by other guys. I think I saw a bunch of what he did in at Portland and then against Memphis and that Kyrie's return. Those were big deal performances. I'm just wondering if are they sustainable? Are these just a very small snapshot of a season? But his past 3 games have been, I would say, highly encouraging, and even had some really good defensive moments there. Is this going to be something where his role sort of fluctuates and seesaws though from game to game, or I don't even know, week to week, or just based on availability? And is he built to adapt in that manner on offense? I honestly don't know, but if Ben Simmons can, and I'll phrase it this way, if he can play within the flow of an offense and be effective / aggressive rather than dictating the flow of an offense, the Nets, so long as they stay together and don't implode because of something that happens off the court or someone requesting a trade demand, they might be like friskier than you and I have credit, because we were just both out on them. And I don't trust the Nets. You should not trust the Nets. That's a terrible decision. But what is, like, are you more optimistic for Ben Simmons on offense now? Or are you still just, I'm probably more, I might be more confused than ever after watching his past 2 games.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, the numbers have improved. The 11 to 13 effort, great. It's still, I think for me, like, there are blueprints, right, of guys that have similar limitations, which is like that cannot and do not shoot from the perimeter, and that, generally speaking, are out there to possess the ball, to move it. I'll sorry, but I'll bring it back to the Warriors. Like, Kevon Looney's role on the Warriors, and granted, this is a center that, is the 5th option at all times, but he is integral to their offense because he understands how to screen, how to pass, how to get guys open, how to be just like a connective piece. Draymond Green, really, if you want to stay there, is kind of similar. Like, he doesn't get guarded on the perimeter. He has to be effective by setting other players up. The problem is, like, Ben Simmons is a max salary guy that, is playing with, or when the Nets are healthy, is playing with offensive players that should really open up scoring opportunities for him. And if he's not willing to take advantage of those, which the drive stat is really telling, the lack of free throws, we've seen, that everyone's talking about that. Those 2 things are linked. I think if he's not willing to attack against defenses that are basically daring him to do something with the ball, then I'm not going to be convinced that he makes sense as a key piece of a good team. It just because, like, or if he just became like a legitimate defensive player of the year candidate again, like if he really could play center and really could switch across 5 positions, I don't think that's realistic, just because the Nets, they don't rebound, they get killed inside when they play centers. Ben Simmons at center, I think, exacerbates those issues. So yeah, this is why it's a good question. I don't know what he is. I'm not super optimistic, even after some better play over the last week or so. It should be noted we're recording this the night, or the morning before he goes back to Philly. So, like, who knows what's going to happen there. I don't see a pathway for him to really help the team, just because the aggression, it just isn't there. The willingness to attack, to get fouled, to try to score isn't there. And if he's not wired that way, fine. But that's just what it is. You can't just be a ball mover without doing much else. And that sells him a little short, but not too much.
Would you say you're more optimistic, the same, after the past 3 games?
Slightly more, but it hasn't like fundamentally changed sort of what I think his role is on this team, or what it can be. If it's a health thing, if it really is just the back has not allowed him to move like he wants to, then sure. But it's not clear to me that that's the only factor in play here. So we'll move on. Boy, we got through the Nets pretty well there. I'm surprised.
I think they've been beaten to death, which might have helped, but I still think that's the biggest. We could harp on Kyrie's availability, but like the biggest question is just like, what does Ben Simmons look like on offense? Because that is your single biggest swing piece.
And he's the guy that's probably going to be there the longest, because Kyrie will be gone most likely, and Kevin Durant is already asked to be traded. And
I know it gets asked a bunch, and I just tried to tackle questions that you and I haven't discussed ad nauseum already, but wondering, are they like, does Kevin Durant request a trade at some point? Like, that is a fair question. You could say it's low hanging fruit. It's a fair question.
Yeah, that's the thing. You want to pick maybe that question defines the season more than any other for them. But like, what are we going to talk about?
Would you bet on Kevin Durant finishing the season in Brooklyn?
Man, that's a great question, because I don't know. I would. I think I would. And it's only because I'm not sure where the package to get him comes from yet. That could change. as we get past the middle of December and some more options open up. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think he would be if you had to bet? Is he there at the end of the year?
I want to be like spicy and say that I don't think he will be.
Yeah.
And I feel like just everything we've seen about this team points against the sensible happening, where it's like, well, like
Right.
reevaluate it over the summer. You haven't even like figured out your permanent head coaching situation at least, even though Jacques Vaughn is there right now. I I don't know. There's just like Phoenix not having made a move yet on Jay Crowder, and just like once DeAndre Ayton becomes trade eligible, I almost, and like Miami, we'll get to them sort of just floundering around. Like, do they come in? But you're right. Like the package to build him, I do think he's upped his stock since the initial trade demand because there's not as many questions maybe about his durability.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but like this just feels weird to talk about too when you have the Nets coming off of uh, two straight victories, which is a big deal for them, and maybe they'll get a third straight. But if I want to say, I think Kevin Durant gets moved this year, but I
You
feel like I'm afraid
want
to
to
say it.
say it.
I feel like I'm afraid to say it. So people who are listening will basically know that I'm saying I think Kevin Durant gets moved.
Okay, got it.
Wade, my dog Wade agrees too.
Okay, it's been Wade's stamp of approval. I got the Charlotte Hornets, and this really is like this is low hanging fruit, but it's the only it jumps out to me as the only question we really need to talk about is does ownership / management have the guts to tank? And I think what we've seen over the last few years suggests that the Hornets just aren't. That's just not how they prefer to operate, and it would go against just sort of. I don't know who to ascribe it to. It's easy to say Michael Jordan just doesn't want to preside over a team that's not trying to win. But Indiana operated that way for a long time. And though the Pacers are not bad now, they at least took steps to rebuild and get younger and just sort of see what happens. But so to me, the Hornets, they have a lot of cover. If they did, they're 4-14. They have the worst offense in the league. That's tied directly to Miles Bridges not being there, LaMelo Ball missing 13 games, playing 3, re-spraining the ankle, and is out again. Gordon Hayward's hurt, predictably. They're getting very little of interest from any of the centers they have on the roster, especially the young guys that have not played. Kai Jones, like MIA. Mark Williams is down in the G League and doing well, but still not ideal for a bad team to have a lottery pick just down in the G League in year 1. If it's year 3 like James Wiseman, then it's totally fine. But so they have excuses. Like they can steer into this. They're 4-14 as we're recording this. It would be like as understood of a tank as there has been in the league for a long time, just because, oh, we're hurt. Oh, forces beyond our control. Miles Bridges isn't there. LaMelo, just it's all there. It's so easy. It would be so easy to do it. And I think you could make the case that this is a team that needs a second piece worse than almost any other in the league.
Right.
Just because other than LaMelo, like I just don't know who is on this roster that you could feel good about building around, like as a real piece. So it comes down to ownership and management, and I guess coaching, because Steve Clifford probably did not think that this was the way the season was going to go when he agreed to come back. So I'm curious, do you view Charlotte the same way as like an obvious tanker that just really needs to embrace this, or and part 2, do you think they will actually do it?
I think there's not even a question there. I think Hornets fans would even say that it's time to tank or maybe play JT Thor a bunch with Nick Richards and maybe wind up winning games on accident. But LaMelo's extension eligible this year. You need, after this season, you need to find him that second guy. And the best way to do that is going to be through the draft. I don't know what a teardown necessarily looks like for them because I don't know what value you get for a Gordon Hayward, even a Terry Rozier he's shot the ball god awful on corner threes and from mid range this year. You're certainly, you can maybe get something for Kelly Oubre Jr. Is Cody Martin worth something when he's trade eligible? He's been injured. At this point, though, it almost makes you wonder: do they need to tank? Or are they just naturally that bad? Do you just maybe LaMelo comes back again since he's day to day right now and you start rattling off a bunch of victories and then maybe you make the tough call. I just don't know. I think you could leave them alone and they might still be one of the 4 worst teams in the league.
Yeah, I think the main thing would be just LaMelo gets SGA treatment, of the last couple of years, or just you really slow play it, which honestly, if you read, if it's he aggravated the same ankle, that's the type of thing that really might just need a couple months, a couple more, just, and, just really take your time. The other way that manifests itself as a tank manifests itself is you really do kind of look at the Russell Westbrook stuff, and maybe you take one pick back to make it a Gordon Hayward trade, or you just look at stripping off anybody that has any significant money beyond this year and really go for it. The problem with that is, I think, based on how this team has operated, you're talking about now like a multi-year rebuild, which is harder for me to imagine that, being sold than, oh, we're gonna do like a 1-year thing and then we're gonna retool and be right back at it. I guess if you end up with Wembanyama, though, the patience gets extended quite a bit. So yeah.
Is that the move then for them, where it's sort of that juggles Michael Jordan's natural impulses versus what they should actually do, where it's, okay, Kelly Oubre Jr. is going to be a free agent, so he's going to get traded. And maybe you're just playing your young bigs a bunch to kind of see what you have in all of them. And then you're shutting everybody else down, and you're hoping you get Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson maybe, and then you're trying to win again immediately next year. Not the route I would go. I think it needs to be a multi-year process, because if I were them, I would absolutely, if they were going to give me picks, but I'd absolutely trade Hayward at least for Westbrook plus Oubre if you want to go that way. Maybe you value Terry Rozier, but I would get Terry Rozier's money off the books, just be super lean. He's a good player. I think his shooting will normalize some, but I just don't know what purpose he's going to serve on this team. And they're just so devoid of bright spots. I shouldn't say that. Nick Richards has been frisky. JT Thor's a shot of adrenaline. The Dennis Smith Jr. story has been fantastic. Just his defensive efforts, some of his finishing around the basket, the passing that has come along for him. But like, if Dennis Smith Jr. were 20% of the way through the season and he's like your rosiest storyline at this point, there's probably an issue. And I think, look, I still like PJ Washington. He seemed like he was in an outsized role and had for most of this season, basically looking at the personnel they've had. And I thought they've done some interesting things with him. The elbow touches that they've juiced up have worked out well for stretches, but he also has just had wildly uneven offensive performance. I wrote about it where it's like it vacillates between like, oh, this is incredible, and what the fuck did I just watch? He's going into restricted free agency. And it's like, you kind of have to ask yourself, should we be moving him? We never see guys who are worth like anything get moved on their rookie scale. Like Grant Williams didn't come to an extension with Boston. He's going to finish the year in Boston and you'll play it out in restricted free agency. Yeah. So my guess is they would keep him, but you're going to lock yourself into another player from this core who you're not really, I guess, sure fits. Perhaps he doesn't cost. The cost basis won't be that much. But I would look at moving him. I would look at moving everybody. But I'm just wondering if, because he's going to be a free agent, because Kelly Oubre Jr. is going to be a free agent, is that just sort of that's the low-hanging fruit for this team? Is, well, we surf their market. We're going to suck anyway. But they should go the nuclear route. Your question was, do I think Michael Jordan will let it happen? I don't. I think the Hornets might be bad enough to have incredible lottery odds without doing anything. I don't think they're going to steer any further into those lottery odds or a future that puts them on a multi-year trajectory where it's not like, oh, we can't contend for the 10 seed before next year. Whoa. No, we can't do that.
Yeah. It's kind of an indictment when, a franchise really just consistently aims for the middle instead of the top and is so bad at that it ends up tanking anyway. That's hard to do.
It's bizarre too, because does Michael Jordan internally think that this roster is supposed to be a lot better? Do you know what I mean? Like, is he actively going into this like, oh, I'm trying to get that gate revenue on one playing game, or is it like he actually thinks like, oh, like we should be like a top 6 team in the East or something? That's what I'm very curious about.
That's a question we really can't answer.
That brings me to the Chicago Bulls. And my question for them, I have many questions for them. I'll use the central focus here. Should we be concerned about Zach LaVine? And I'm not just talking because he was benched at the end of the game against Orlando. The Bulls just shellacked the Celtics without LaVine playing particularly well. He did play. He was 8 of 20 from the floor. But so he returns to the rotation after a game out, and in those 7 games, he's shooting 48.5% on twos, actually higher than his season because he's been shooting basically a career low on twos, 32.8% from threes. His free throw clip is at a career low. His 53% at the rim is basically a career low. His finishing there. Is it time to worry about him? And is there anything that the Bulls can do? Is it just a matter of, oh, Zach LaVine needs to be better? for their offense to be better. They've held firm at 20th in points allowed per possession over this small stretch, but now we've seen the defense regress even more. I've contemplated, should they have a starting lineup change where they're pulling Patrick Williams for Javonte Green just to give you that extra athletic juice? I've wondered, like, oh, is this just sort of, they have a deficit of shooting, and even if Zach LaVine starts hitting more of his threes, and look, he wasn't even, I think he's still at like 36% or something from the season. It's not like, disastrously low. Is this just a function of the roster? They don't have enough shooters, and Lonzo Ball is probably not going to play this year. So you sort of have to take your medicine there. And asking all these questions, is there anything that they can do outwardly? Because they're approaching, I'm not saying they should blow it up. I'm not trying to turn that into this discussion, but like, you're entering this weird spot now because you might end up in the bird right trap with Vucevic, he hasn't been bad this year, but he's headed towards free agency. You already paid Zach LaVine. You have DeRozan, Lonzo Ball, Caruso. Like, can you count on the health of this roster? What is Patrick Williams? He's been up and down this year too. Like, some of his numbers are very favorable, but he's just looking, it looks like he gets it on offense and then he doesn't. And I will say, particularly over the past couple weeks, it kind of feels like some of the main players on this roster might not really give a shit about defense anymore. So that's the vibes I'm getting. And so those are my overarching questions on the Bulls. I do think, that's why I didn't want to ask this question, and you can disagree. I think we should be worried about the Bulls. The Zach LaVine question, is this like, knowing that the knee stuff in the rear view now, or that he's still dealing with, is that something to be concerned about now and moving forward?
I mean, so big picture. Yeah, I'm concerned about the Bulls. I think, if we've talked at all about the Bulls at any point in the past, I've probably said just how bad I thought the Vucevic trade was on its face, and because of sort of what it signaled this team thought it was going to be able to do, which was be a lot better than I thought that it could with Vucevic. And then, even that ceiling never seemed all that high to me. So, they're 7-10 right now. The offense sucks. The defense has overperformed, I think, to my mind, considering Lonzo Ball hasn't played, and considering, LaVine looks slower. DeRozan has never guarded anybody. And Caruso hasn't been as good as he was last year, which is probably foreseeable just because he was so impactful, especially on defense early last season. So like, yeah, there's myriad issues and points of concern. LaVine, for me, like you said, it's the knee, just wouldn't it make sense if that were the explanation, right? If all it was this is a guy that's had an ACL in the past, that's been bothered by knee trouble, for portions of the last 3 really years. And then it kind of, had another procedure, is a guy that, while a great shooter, was really defined early by just ridiculous athleticism, just like one of the swoopiest, most explosive open floor leapers that we had. And he's just not that anymore. And so adjusting to that is difficult, just not getting the kind of production you can get from being more athletic than everyone on the floor makes that harder. So I would be worried for sure, especially considering what they're paying him for the foreseeable future. He needs to be someone that is on, a night or 2 nights a week, close to the best player on the floor. And he hasn't been that, at all, hardly ever this season, and was, as it was to play off the controversy and the drama lately, like wasn't on the floor at the end of a game recently. And it kind of made sense based on how he'd played to that point. I just think
overall, did you see the quote that he had on that, by the way?
It was fine, right?
It was just like, I thought that was just really self-aware. And for someone who's still only 27 and wants to be on the floor, I thought that was like, bravo to him and like Billy Donovan for hashing it out. I thought it was so undramatic what came from that. Like, the moment felt like, oh, but then it was just like, I thought that was like good for Zach LaVine. I thought that was really fucking cool.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It doesn't change the fact that like this may be something we have to deal with again, right. and then we'll see how it goes the next time. The fact, that being, I don't know, I guess maybe I'm always like nervous for players that a large part of their effectiveness was based on athleticism, that's why I'm like always scared for Ja Morant, and why I was skeptical about Zion early on. It's just, if that's really what's getting you by to a large degree, it's going to go at some point. And if you have injuries that kind of fast track the decline of that elite athleticism, then some guys just don't adjust well. And I'm not saying Levine will never be as good as he was just say last year, but like he is playing differently. So, and if that sustains, then like for sure you're worried about him, and then also the Bulls, because then you're talking about a team that maybe doesn't have a lot of positive value assets if they do decide to pivot, because the guys that they have are either old or expensive or both. So it's an issue. I guess I didn't expect a ton from the Bulls, so I'm not like shocked. But if you did expect something decent from Chicago, this is a pretty concerning spot to be in.
Yeah, and they just don't they owe their first round pick this year and in 2025. So there's not much you can do on the trade market. I guess shooting could come a little bit cheaper though. Like they don't need to go out, and I mean, you could argue they need to go out and get a star, but you could go out and maybe get shooting for a lot cheaper, just because that's something that they clearly need for this team.
Yeah. We've got the Cleveland Cavaliers next. This again, another, I don't know. Well, I shouldn't complain because I'm getting a lot of the good teams and you're getting the controversial or difficult ones to do. My main question, which you can tie to lots of other things, is what are they going to do with small forward? That was an issue coming into the year because Isaac Okoro just didn't pop. Karis LeVert has had the bulk of the starts there. I mean, if we want to just get down to it, like Dean Wade is the answer based on all of the lineup data and on-off numbers and sort of the role that he can play. Because LeVert is an on-ball guy that just makes sense to me, even though he shot it better this year than you'd expect. I think. You don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure at least earlier this season he was looking pretty good from three relative to his standards. But Wade is the better catch and shoot guy. He's got more size, more length, kind of fits like LeVert's at 37.3% from deep, which is pretty comfortably a career high.
You can still start to see like the struggle of like him starting and how it wasn't necessarily like the cleanest fit. And so I think what he do 2 games off the bench or something looked a lot better for him immediately.
It makes more sense if you're built around Garland and Mitchell, obviously, but then also if you want Evan Mobley to start kind of being a little bit more involved offensively in terms of his facilitation.
Which he has been. He's been a monster over the past like 2 weeks or whatever.
So then what's LeVert really out there for with that group? Now you're going to mix and match throughout the game, but I'd rather have that guy coming in with mostly bench units and just, get us some high volume, like slightly below average efficiency offense for 4 or 5 minutes. And then we'll bring the big guns back out. Like that's the type of role that makes sense for him. So I think Wade is the answer at the 3. I guess they could go out and try to make a move. I kind of would like to just see how this looks with everybody healthy and in the right roles, which I think you saw more of minus the Garland missing time during their really hot start. But it's just one of the most glaring issues positionally on a really good team that we have in the league. And again, maybe that does a disservice to Wade, who's hurt, but he seems to make sense. Plus 24.5 with him at the 3 alongside the starters, minus 4.3 with LeVert in that same role. This is through Monday night's game, so it could have changed. But if you have LeVert on with Garland and Mitchell off, this is to let's move him to the 6-man role. The Cavs are plus 8.2. So that's a tiny sample. You could have an opponent hit like 4 threes instead of missing 4 threes in that small of a sample, and it flips the whole thing. But it fits the theory of how this team, I think, should sort of be built. But I don't know. I think unless you're going to swing a deal, unless you're going to I don't feel like Crowder is the right guy for that. And I want to say that there's some, obstacles to him coming back to Cleveland. I just don't know. I don't know what you do at the 3 unless you really think Dean Wade is the guy that you're going to have out there at the end of games, theoretically in like the second round of the playoffs even.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, as good as Dean Wade is. And I really like Dean Wade. I don't know, what do you look at with their trade assets? I don't think Isaac Okoro's done anything to boost his value externally. And I think you're at the point where until you see Rubio, what he looks like when he comes back, I don't know that you can even justify moving LeVert at this point. Are we overreacting to they had that really dry spell, where they lost, what was it, 5 in a row? And it was all they lost to the Warriors, who we know suck. So losing to the Warriors is a big deal.
Terrible.
But they rattle off 3. I mean, beating Charlotte in double overtime. It's not really anything to brag about, but you pummel Miami. You handily take care. They beat Atlanta on Monday. So I'm just like, I can't bring myself to have urgency for them because I still feel like the Donovan Mitchell trade was made with the bigger picture in mind. And so that if this is something you address over the offseason, when, by the way, you could still have cap space, that's
Which
when I
is
would expect.
wild.
Right.
That's wild.
And I think what helps is that because there's no urgency, like you can sit on the trade market and see what develops. And maybe you're able to pick up someone to fill what we would call playoff 3 minutes because you don't think, I mean, like, because their second best option at the 3, functionally, I think you could, if it's talent, it's Karis LeVert. But like, is it Lamar Stevens? Because like who's been starting? So it's when you're talking about the highest level, and I think, Cavs fans might want to nitpick on like maybe some of the other struggles that we've seen. But like the fact that, Donovan Mitchell, yeah, he's cooled off, but Darius Garland has looked really good. Like that's the benefit of having this roster is there's just going to be guys. Karis LeVert looked really bad. Before he started missing time. So, but then he comes off the bench. Like I said, I think it was for 2 games. He just looked at least a little bit more at home. But that's the benefit of having so much talent and depth here. And I think, look, the bigger development for me is just like Evan Mobley, like low key, just looks like a monster on offense over the past couple weeks. Like he's shooting, he's hit fadeaways, he's hit some hook shots. They're not the highest of efficiency, but like the situations that they've put him in, they're really trying to plumb the depths of his offensive skill set. And to do that and still not be bad is really important. And is the answer just, well, Evan Mobley is our wing defender because we have Jared Allen and we'll move around everybody else as we have to. So I guess I don't feel as strongly as you that they need somebody this year, but that is, you look at this roster and that's just that's the no brainer. Like what could they do here? Because if they upgrade that spot, like they vault up they're already in like probably the second tier of title contenders still, just because I know, again, they had that dry spell, but so many teams are going through that. Like the first tier is Boston and Milwaukee. And then there's like a bunch of teams vying for that second, like one, the second tier of title contendership.
Yeah. No, to your point, the answer to every Cavs question is, well, like Evan Mobley could fix that. Whatever it is, like you need a point guard, sure, give him a year, he'll figure it out. He was always the answer, right? Even when the Mitchell trade happened, it was always, well, this is fine as long as Mitchell's the second best player on the team and Evan Mobley is the super duper star, which I still think is probably where this ends.
He is shooting, by the way, about 44% on 2-point jumpers over his past 8 games.
It's happening. It's going to happen. Yeah, it's happening.
That leaves me with the Detroit Pistons, who they forced this question onto us. The Cade Cunningham left shin injury. I was hoping we would find out either during this podcast or before it, preferably, whether he was going the surgery route or rest route. A lot of people seem to expect he's going to go the surgery route, that he will miss the rest of the season. I don't know if that's going to be the case. And are there any silver linings here? And I think you could I think the easy question is, are they all in on Wembanyama now? And it's like, if Cade's not playing, yeah, like you could let Dwayne Casey try and win games. He not win no games. I would argue if Cade Cunningham is out for the season, they will wind up trading Bojan Bogdanovic, which then gets super interesting for the trade market. I'm just more curious, like, what does this team... There's the easy experimentation is, okay, like we're going to see even more of what we have in Killian Hayes and Jaden Ivey. But I think, like, I just want to reinforce that while people have issues with the acceleration of Cade's development, he is still hyper important to this offense. When he's on the court, they have a 112.2 offensive rating. That's close to league average. Without Cade, it's 106.4. That's the 12th percentile. Without Cade and with Ivy, it's 107.8. So a little bit better to the 18th percentile. I'm very interested to see what Jaden Ivey kind of looks like having control of an entire offense. I do feel like sometimes he's been better than I expected, him and Jalen Duren both. I do wonder if like he is sometimes goaded into just taking, like he bails out too easily, the defense, like goaded into taking these shots that he shouldn't from the perimeter. I do think though, when you look at the way that he's able to attack, if you're going to put him in lineups where there are at least 3 shooters on the court, that maybe you discover something about yourself in the way you can play without Cade. I do not see a silver lining though overall, because this team is still bad defensively. I don't know, Cade's absence, does that help? Does that hurt? They've tried a lot of different things on defense, and James L. Edwards III wrote a great piece on it a couple weeks back for The Athletic. I actually think I might have already plugged it on this podcast. So I can't bring myself to think that there are many silver linings other than look, Killian Hayes looked kind of like, I don't know, like kind of peppy past couple weeks, shooting over 40% from three over his past whatever games it was, I think 7. So yeah, you get to see more of that, but without Cade here, it just sucks because this doesn't seem like an injury where it's, oh, do we have to worry about what he's going to look like next season? But to not have him and to not gain as much information as you can on what your most important core players look like moving forward in Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, and Cade just together, getting more of that sample size, mixing and matching with them to see that burn out maybe before, we get to the quarter pole of the season really blows. The upside, though, of course, is for a team that does not have a ton of other teams as future first round picks. This will be a boon for their lottery odds. And if you wind up with things get interesting if they end up in the Scoot Henderson spot and you have Cade and Jaden Ivey and you're in the Scoot Henderson spot. But if you want them to be in on Wembanyama, like and I will say this is not me trying to be national podcast. Let's not dig deep. If Cade's out, that's exactly what you need to be doing. I just don't think that you need to start. You could keep Bojan Bogdanovic and probably still be bad enough to be like a bottom 4 team. But I would expect him to just get moved if Cade is out for the rest of the year. That would be my guess. So is there anything that the actual question is, well, where do you land on what do you do if Cade is out? But also, what are you watching for without Cade?
Yeah, there's not a lot to do. I think you're right that this will just sort of take its natural course, which is, all of, and that dovetails with what I would do is, yeah, you move any veteran you can for future assets. And really the silver lining, again, you hit it is you get to see if Ivy is like the idea. Optimally, Ivy and Cunningham get a bunch of reps together and develop sort of a who does what when kind of understanding, or at least the beginnings of that, because that takes a really long time. That's the best case scenario for this year, or was the best case scenario for this year if Cunningham does, in fact, miss the season, or at least a bunch more time, or is limited, which is kind of the only options on the table. But I think the second best option is seeing what Ivy looks like as just, okay, here you go. You got the ball. We'll do what we can to either, keep you out there with a really good screen setter or a bunch of spacing, and let's see what it looks like. Because, one of the early angles of the season was he does have the ability, I think, to be a primary ball handler in a good offense, if only because of the athleticism, the willingness to pass, just kind of he's got at least the starter's toolkit for being like a number one option as a ball handling point guard, playmaker, leading scorer. He's got the tools, I think, to do that. The issue so far is we just don't really have enough reps to see what he could look like, and we're going to get those. So just for example, I was trying to look for lineups where what's Ivy look like if you put as much shooting as a team like the Pistons can around him, and really, so there's a lineup that's played 2 possessions with Ivy as the only point guard on the floor. So no Burks, for example. I don't want Burks out there because he can run the offense. No Killian Hayes, no Cade Cunningham. Ivy has played 2 possessions with Livers, Bey, Bogdanovic, and Stewart, which I think is probably about as stretchy as you can get. He's played 8 with Livers, Bey, Bogdanovic, and Bagley. Bagley can't shoot, but he kind of floats around the perimeter. Mm-hmm. More of that stuff, I guess. Let's see what that looks like. Or if you want to really build his pick and roll chemistry with Duren, then that's cool too. The offense will suck because there's just not enough talent, and the defense will stay bad. That's what I'd do. I just this is your season now, Jaden Ivey. Let's get these lumps out of the way and see if you can be the guy, and then we'll figure out where you fit with Cade next year. That's the only positive to it, and the draft pick. That's the only way to go. We talked about, should Charlotte tank? The Pistons are going to do it anyway, but they should really do it now, because if Cade's not there, then what's the season for?
Right. And I guess you could test out more with even Sadiq Bey a little bit. And there's a lot of information I think still to be gleaned with Killian Hayes. It just really just kind
of, I don't know about Hayes.
Well, my whole point is just now, well, what is the alternative? You have Jaden Ivey and you need you just want to play Corey Joseph and Alec Burks a ton. What is that doing?
Well, if you want to tank, yeah. So, man, we got a couple of bummers in a row there.
That injury, it sucks because I think Cade Cunningham is going to be. I think I'm higher on Cade than the consensus now. Somehow, I thought it was just known that he was going to be a megastar. Now people started to question whether that's going to happen. I'm still all the way there with him, and so I enjoy watching him play. And again, I like there are things that are going to be worth monitoring for the Pistons, but it just gets appreciably harder to understand what this team could become without having Cade on the court. And again, there's the benefit of your draft pick odds, but it's just such a bummer. We're saying all this like maybe he just rests and he's like not
Yeah,
out for the rest of the season.
right.
But if he's missing even substantial time, maybe that's the best of both worlds. He misses a little bit, and like you're so far out of the race that you're trading by Bogdanovich anyway, and you're not winning games. But I hope that he makes a full recovery.
Yeah, I know, of course, of course. But potentially this is just time lost. This is the valuable developmental time that you're going to lose. You got to make the best of. I have the Pacers next, and this is I'm going to admit that this is like probably not the most pressing question for the Pacers, but I really like Tyrese Halliburton a lot, and I want to talk about him. So here we are.
That's not a question.
I have a question. Is Tyrese Halliburton the best young guard in the league, non-Doncic division? And so I have to put some parameters on that because like Ja Morant exists and other stuff. I'm going 22 or younger in terms of their age 22 season. And here's a stat, and it might be a little stale because this is from like 36 hours ago, and it could change. Point stands. Halliburton has a plus 7.3 box plus minus. That is the fourth highest for a player 22 or younger all time. And the only other guys that have done that for a full season are Chris Paul. This is age 22 or younger. Luka Doncic twice because he's ridiculous, and Michael Jordan, and that's it. So, like, yeah, that's one stat. I'm obviously not comparing Halliburton to those guys. There's competition now around the league. You could say Anthony Edwards is still a better prospect. The numbers do not support that at all. Cade, maybe. Tyrese Maxey, maybe. But even then, you're kind of stretching a little bit. I mean, he's on a list with, other than Luka, it doesn't skew modern, that box plus minus thing. It's not like 8 of the top 10, under 22 guard box plus minuses are from the last like 3 years. Like if you'd look at high volume 3-point shooting or offensive efficiency stuff, some of those stats are all just, because there's offense has gone bonkers. That's not the case here. Like you got to go, you get back, 20, 30 years pretty comfortably. So it's early. He's an outlier. There's another stat that like he's going to be, if he finishes the season averaging 20 and 10 with a 40% 3-point clip on his volume, he'll be the first guy to do it in like ever, or, in some modern era, ridiculous stuff. I think Halliburton is the best player that was involved in the trade on either team between the Pacers and Kings. That includes De'Aaron Fox. I think Halliburton's better than him today, even though Fox is playing the best he's ever played. I just think he's going to be really great. I think the Pacers low key have one of the best building blocks in the league, and he's not discussed enough. So is there anybody you like under 22 that I listed or that I forgot that you'd rather have? Not to put you on the spot, but I mean, I gave you Anthony Edwards if you want to just take him. But I couldn't be higher on him, and I don't think he's talked about enough. So I formulated a question to make that point.
That is an interesting question. Is LaMelo Ball still under 22?
I don't think so. He didn't show up he didn't have a high enough box plus minus to fit into that group, but I'm going to look that up right now.
I don't know if I would take him. Well, I was just curious. Yeah, he's 21. So I don't know if I would
take the conversation. I'd rather have Halliburton, I think.
Yeah, I guess he might be. Wow. I mean, him versus Anthony Edwards is tough when you go off this season alone. The thing is that Halliburton scales to so many more situations, clearly.
I'm glad you went there because that's the real point about him. So, I mean, not to interrupt, but like he came into the league as like, I'm not sure what he's got on the ball. Like he's going to make spot up shots. He's not strong enough or quick enough to get to the basket, well, sorry, but like, he's got one of the best in-between games in the league. His shot form is still weird, but he gets it off from everywhere. He's got a bunch of floaters. He's one of the smartest passers in the league, full stop. Mm-hmm. He can be your first. He is your lead option right now on a team that's winning more than it loses. But it would be so easy to fit almost any other kind of talent around him just because like he could be like pick a team. There's just no one that you could put next to him that he wouldn't be able to fit with because of the shooting, because of his willingness to be like a Lonzo Ball connective passer if he needs to be, because of his, defensive ball hawk. It's just like the scalability. So right now he's a lead option and he's 22 and he's super productive. And like he doesn't have to be that over the next 10 years to be like a great piece on a title contending team. So the pathway, Anthony Edwards has one way to be great, I think, which is to be the best, like, you know, you're 28 a game, top option scorer who can't really pass and defends like once in a while and is a dubious shooter. But Halliburton just like pick a trajectory, you know, towards like all-star status, and he could get there in so many different ways.
Wow. I might be ready to go. You might have sold me because his only competition, it seems like, would be LaMelo, Anthony Edwards, if you want to throw Tyrese Maxey in there.
Yeah.
I'll say yes.
Yeah, right. Okay, good. We answered a question, commenters. We did it. We got a concrete answer out of that. If you don't have anything else, I'll take us out. Everybody, thanks for listening. That's going to do it. You can, as Dan mentioned in the beginning, remember, trying to grow this audience, trying to grow our reach. We're trying to get into your homes and into your ears and your brains. So download, subscribe, comment, like, rate, review us, give us 5 stars on iTunes, and any place else you can evaluate us positively would be fantastic, but that's a big one. Follow us on our socials, which we have in the YouTube and podcast descriptions. Join the Discord, which I have made a note to do myself. I pledge that I will be in there once I learn what a computer is. Dan can maybe help me with that. Tell your friends and enemies about us. Thank you again for listening. And in closing, as always, I would like to sincerely apologize to Jared Allen. And on behalf of Dan, I'm going to do it this week. I would like to shout out the one and only, who did not get mentioned again. Well, we did the East, but still, you usually like to fit him in somehow. Frank Ntilikina.
The Wizards should trade for Frank Ntilikina to juice up their offense.